Thank you. Revelation chapter 14. That's on page 1327 for the young people in your Geneva Bible, if you'd like to turn there. Revelation chapter 14, we'll be looking at verses 1 to 20. Chapter 14, verse 1. Then I looked, and lo, a Lamb stood on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000, having his Father's name written in their foreheads. And I heard a voice from heaven as the sound of many waters, and as the sound of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sung, as it were, a new song before the throne, and before the four beasts and the elders, and no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were bought from the earth. These are they which are not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These are bought from men, being the firstfruits unto God and unto the Lamb. And in their mouths was found no guile, for they are without spot before the throne of God. Then I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having an everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people, saying with a loud voice, Fear God, and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come. And worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of waters. There followed another angel, saying, Babylon, that great city, is fallen. It is fallen, for she made all nations to drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image, and receive his mark on his forehead or on his hand, the same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, yea, of the pure wine, which is poured into the cup of his wrath. And he shall be tormented in fire and brimstone before the holy angels and before the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment shall ascend evermore, and they shall have no rest day or night which worship the beast and his name. Here is the patience of the saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Then I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Write, the dead which die in the Lord are fully blessed. Even so saith the Spirit, for they rest from their labors, and their works follow them. And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the white cloud, the cloud, one sitting like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is ripe to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. Then another angel came out of the temple, which is in heaven, having also a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar, which had power over fire, and cried with a loud cry to him that had the sharp sickle, and said, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vineyard of the earth, for her grapes are ripe. And the angel thrust in his sharp sickle on the earth, and cut down the vines of the vineyard of the earth, and cast them into that great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress unto the horse bridles by the space of 1,600 furlongs. Another difficult text to interpret. We'll, of course, rely on historic testimony to interpret our verses. The title of our message this morning, Revelation chapter 14, verses 1 to 20. 3 Reformations, then Judgment. In last week's text, we learned about the true character and nature of the Antichrist, specifically how the Roman Antichrist would be a combination of the Roman civil government, or the Latin kingdom as we call it, as well as the antichristian church, which is the Papacy. The two, state and government, work together to destroy the true church for 1,260 years while the true church remains in the wilderness. There are 3 points to our message this morning, verses 1 to 5, the characteristics of the true church. Verses 6 to 13, the message of 3 reforming angels. And then verses 14 to 20, a future event, Christ and his avenging angels. Our context. The timing of our text is from the very beginning of the Reformation. It will cover 3 Reformation periods. We're either in the 3rd Reformation period now or in between the 2nd and 3rd. In our text, 3 angels will appear. Each angel brings reform to the true church during 3 different periods of Reformation. In our final verses, 4 avenging angels will bring an end to the Roman state and church. This downfall signals the beginning of the millennial reign of Christ. We come to our first point, verses 1 to 5, the characteristics of the true church. Verse 1, Then I looked, and lo, a Lamb stood on Mount Zion, and with him 144,000 having his Father's name written in their foreheads. In this first image, we have a vision of Christ the Lamb standing with his church. Here, that church is called Mount Zion, because of course the church was on the hill Mount Zion. Christ is standing with his church, which is symbolically numbered as 144,000. Here he appears as the king and head of his church, and he is ready to launch the first of 3 Reformations. The number 144,000 is used to represent the elect church, and is deduced by multiplying the 12 tribes of Israel, that's where we got our first 12, which represents the Old Testament church, and the 12 apostles, which represent the New Testament church. Multiplying them together, 12 times 12, we get 144, Old and New Testament church together. Then we multiply that 144 number by 1,000, which stands for the number of years of the millennial reign of Christ. So we get 144 times 1,000. 144,000 is the symbolic number of elect witnesses that have not taken the mark of the beast. Verses 2 and 3. And I heard a voice from heaven as the sound of many waters, and as the sound of great thunder, of a great thunder. And I heard the voice of harpers harping with their harps. And they sung as it were a new song before the throne, and before the 4 beasts and the elders, and no man could learn that song but the 144,000 which were bought from the earth. First we had what John sees in verse 1. Now we hear what John hears. He hears a loud sound as loud as rushing waters and great thunder. The harpers harping with their harps stands for the voices of the elect singing praises to God. The 144,000 are singing a new song, we're told. It is a new song by the church, sung by the church victorious, because they are in a perfected state in heaven with perfect knowledge and perfect understanding. God's grace is complete in them, having been fully applied, and so they now are in heaven singing a new song. Verse 4. These people that are in heaven singing the new song are they which were not defiled with women, for they are virgins. These follow the Lamb whithersoever he goeth. These are bought from men, being the firstfruits unto God and unto the Lamb. So, these elect of God, the 144,000, we're told, never defiled themselves with other religions, like the religion of the Papacy. They were never defiled by the papal beast. They kept themselves as a faithful bride to Christ. They followed the Lamb wherever he goes, even when the Lamb drove them to the wilderness. They went to the wilderness. They are undefiled by spiritual adultery or will worship. They have not capitulated to worship God in the manner of the beast, but offer pure worship to the Lamb alone, according to the commandments of the Lamb. The worship of the church, of course, is the single most identifying mark of whether or not a church is committing spiritual fornication. Hymn singing, musical instruments, holy days, and worship, of course, that does not follow the Redcliffe principle, identify churches as those churches that have defiled themselves. They're not chaste virgins. They've defiled themselves. They defile themselves by worshiping according to man, following the lead of that man of sin, rather than according to the Word of God. Verse 5, still talking about these 144 elect of God. And in their mouth was found no guile, for they are without spot before the throne of God. There's no guile in them or deception that comes out of their mouth of the elect church, because they are adhering to the truth. They are not wavering. They are without hypocrisy. They have a single-mindedness to worshiping after the commands of God. The true church does. They speak the truth as they live it. They will not speak lies of false doctrine or speak words of compromise. They are not hypocrites who profess one thing and do another, say they follow a creed and then not follow it. Although the militant church, of course, is still full of sin, they are already justified by the righteousness of Christ. So here in our first point, we see the great difference between the members of the true church and those who take the mark of the beast. The true church are undefiled according to the doctrines of worship, and they reject the worship of the papal beast. We come to our second point, verses 6 to 13, the message of 3 reforming angels. Verse 6. Then I saw another angel fly in the midst of heaven, having an everlasting gospel to preach unto them that dwell on the earth, and to every nation and kindred and tongue and people. Whenever we read of activity in heaven by God's angels in this book of Revelation, it means that some great event is about to happen on the earth. Here we have the first of 3 angels, which will usher in a time of reformation for the church. 3 angels, 3 reformations. These 3 angels represent revival and reform and speak to the time of the Reformation. These angels will first bring reform, which of course must precede revival. You know, we've had enough revivals without reform. They never work. The term angel refers to the ministers and their churches. We know that from Revelation chapter 1 to 3, where the angels were called the ministers of the churches. This is a vision meant to show that the church militant, that's the church that's still on earth, still fighting the war, not the church triumphant that's in heaven, that's already won, still has a ministry on this earth. In spite of the fact that we're in the wilderness, we still have a ministry on this earth, in spite of the dragon trying to devour our children. The true church is small, but it still exists during these wilderness times, and it's still advancing. The true church alone possesses the rare but hard to find truth. It still maintains first the purity of worship and the purity of doctrine. The warfare of the true church during the wilderness years is going to be mostly defensive, and our weapons will only be spiritual, because we won't have the strength and might to fight the papal beast. Each of these angels should be treated in a chronological manner. In other words, the first angel will begin the Protestant Reformation, and each successive angel will advance the Reformation until the Latin church and state are defeated and the millennium begins. The first angel represents the first fruits of the Reformation, that time period of the 12th and 13th centuries, which include the works of Wycliffe and Huss and the ministry of the Waldensians and the Lollards. The angel of the first Reformation, you'll notice, announces an everlasting gospel. Not the gospel of the papacy, which must come to an end. It's the gospel that will eventually flood the earth and affect every nation and kindred and tongue and people during the millennial reign of Christ. This is the earliest Reformation, and it will be met by the dragon with torture and burning at the stake. Wycliffe's bones were dug up and burned. Huss, of course, was burned at the stake, and the Waldensians, of course, suffered massive torture and death for bringing the first everlasting gospel to the fold. Verse 7, saying with a loud voice, we're still talking about the first angel here, fear God and give glory to him, for the hour of his judgment is come, and worship him that made heaven and earth and the sea and the fountains of water. The message of this early Reformation church is now given, which is fear God and give him the glory. This message of the witnessing church opposes that of Rome, as the Reformation opposed Rome. Rome does not call for the fear of God, but calls for the fear of man. The Roman church and state causes men to fear its tortures and gives glory to created beings like the Pope and Mary and the saints. These early reformers will be the first to oppose worshiping creatures like angels and saints, but call for the worship of the Creator. That's why it says these guys will teach the fear of God, not the fear of the Pope. These first reformers will differ because they will worship in spirit and truth. Sadly, the work of Huss and Wycliffe and the Waldensians, which preceded the first Reformation, was destroyed horrifically by the papacy. With the early leaders dead, the true church declined so much that another Reformation was needed. And verse 8, and there followed another angel, another Reformation, saying, Babylon, that great city, is fallen. It is fallen, for she made all nations to drink of the wine of the wrath of her fornication. This second angel is the ministry of the Protestant Reformation in the days of Luther and Calvin, says historic testimony. The second angel appears to further the Reformation after the decline of the earlier Reformation. The Second Reformation took place in the 16th and 17th centuries, beginning in 1517 with Luther. To these reformers is given the message that the end of Babylon is in sight, saying, Babylon, that great city, is fallen, it is fallen. Why? Because their confessions and creeds would eventually be the doctrines that bring an end to papal Babylon. The fathers of the Reformation were beginning to see that the papacy, or Babylon, was going to fall. Her days were numbered. You'll remember historically, 10 European nations in all realized that they were deceived by the papal power and turned to governments that endorsed the Reformation during this time period. The Reformation would eventually result in public covenanting, bearing testimony against heresies, immoralities, and tyrannies of the Church of Rome. Of all nations, Scotland went the furthest, covenanting with God in both church and state. Luther, of course, you'll remember, during this Reformation brought forth great doctrines of true grace. Calvin returned the teaching of predestination to the church that Augustine used to teach. Zwingli furthered the moral law, especially to civil society, and Knox taught the kingship of Christ in church and state. This Reformation culminated in the work of the Westminster Assembly from 1643 to 1647. Unfortunately, most Protestant ministries have turned their backs on this Reformation and returned to Rome in doctrine, such as many Baptists who maintain Arminianism, which is a return to Rome, and great many churches who deny God's moral law, antinomianism, return to Rome, and those who practice man-centered worship, return to Rome. The period in which we live is that time of great decline, following the Second Great Reformation. Just try to get someone to hold to the standards. They don't want to do it. They want to return to Rome. In America, most Christians are now even cordial with the beast, regarding the papacy as just another branch of Christianity. Most have been deceived into returning to the spiritual whore of Babylon. Verse 9. And the third angel followed them, saying with a loud voice, If any man worship the beast and his image and receive his mark in his forehead or on his hand. Once again, a third angel appears in order to proclaim another reformation because of the decline of the second. But now the angel doesn't speak to large populations as did the previous two angels, but notice to scattered individuals. Notice it says, if any man worship the beast and his image. In this third Reformation, there will be pockets only of true believers who have not declined from the message of the Second Reformation. We will likely not see large churches in this third Reformation or large denominations consisting of a true church. This is a message to those who live towards the very end of the apostasy. It's like the ship is going down and each individual needs to save himself. This angel is hundreds of years after the Second Reformation, when the end of the papacy is very near the time we're living at now, where it's just up to individuals now, because you're not going to find wide bodies of people professing the Second Reformation advancements. It's just going to be up to individuals. The Second Reformation was the furthest advancement of church and state, but like the First Reformation, it too declined. The Third Reformation will not have the effect of the Second. It will not convert nations. It will not make Christ king of church or state, nor will it advance great gospel doctrines and do a great wounding to the papacy as did the Reformation. Now at the millennial reign it will. This is the last Reformation, or warning against the papacy, and it's a final call to all individuals to exchange the gospel of man-centered Rome for the gospel of Christ. The same shall drink of the wine of the wrath of God, yea, of the pure wine which is poured into the cup of his wrath, and he shall be tormented in fire and brimstone before the holy angels and before the Lamb. And the smoke of their torment shall ascend evermore, and they shall have no rest day nor night, which worship the beast and his image, and whosoever receiveth the print of his name. In other words, those individuals who refuse, in the Third Reformation, who refuse to adhere to the call are going to be found in eternal torment. The call is not just to come out of the second beast, which is the ungodly church of the papacy, but also a call out of the civil beast, which is when we give obedience to ungodly magistrates that refuse to acknowledge Christ. To acknowledge the civil beast is to refuse Christ. We are called to disentangle ourselves from both civil and church-related associations that bear the mark of the beast. This is why our reforming fathers insisted that we don't vote, serve in juries, or fight in the military. We're called to be separated from the Roman beast in both church and state. Verses 12 and 13. Here's the patience of saints. Here are they that keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus. Then I heard a voice from heaven saying unto me, Write, blessed are the dead which hereafter die in the Lord. Even so saith the Spirit, for they rest from their labors, and their works follow them. The work of the Third Reformation against the civil state and church will not result in the repentance of either entity. Can't convert the Roman beast. It will only provoke them to anger during the Third Reformation. The secular church and state will work together to silence the voice of the two witnesses, or the true church during the Third Reformation. Yet the true church, we're told, will continue to keep the commandments of God and the faith of Jesus, while the multitude obey unrighteousness and receiving for doctrines the commandments of men. For the purpose of encouragement during this Third Reformation, a voice is heard from heaven directing John to write this, Blessed are the dead which hereafter die in the Lord. This is an encouragement to all who must suffer at the hands of the civil and ecclesiastical beast during the Third Reformation. Now we come to our third point, verses 14 to 20. Christ is avenging angels. This is Christ sending his angels for the final destruction of the Antichrist. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because it's all future. And remember our first principle, history interprets prophecy. We don't have any history here, so we're just going to vaguely talk about what's to happen, but we can't be specific. We're not going to take guesses. Verses 14 to 16. And I looked, and behold, a white cloud, and upon the cloud, one sitting like unto the Son of Man, having on his head a golden crown, and in his hand a sharp sickle. And another angel came out of the temple, crying with a loud voice to him that sat on the cloud, Thrust in thy sickle and reap, for the time is come to reap, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. And he that sat on the cloud thrust in his sickle on the earth, and the earth was reaped. What we're told here is after the angel of the Third Reformation completes its ministry, all that is left is the end of Antichrist. These verses speak of a future time when the Third Reformation is complete and the end of the papacy is very near. Our text now speaks of 4 angels who cry for the end of Antichrist. They are heard by Christ, who brings an end to the Antichrist. These events are all in the future. We're not able to form an historic picture of these events, for we now wait for them to be fulfilled. The angel coming out of the temple is the message of the witnessing church. We do know that. The sickle being held by Christ, of course, represents the judgment being poured out on the unbelieving world. This will be done in response to the prayers of the witnessing church, we're told. After the 3 witnessing and reforming angels have spoken, the end of the Antichrist will come. Here we have a description of the harvest, which is the divine judgment of the nations of apostate Christendom. He who executes the judgment, we're told, is like one of the Son of Man, or Christ. He is enthroned on a white cloud, which he rides as a chariot, and he wears a golden crown, signifying that he is the King of Kings. The angel that comes out of the temple is the loud voice of the church, militant and victorious. For their sakes the Lord of the harvest begin to reap. The saints read the times and know that the time to reap has come, for the harvest of the earth is ripe. In response to the cry of the witnessing church, Christ, we're told, thrusts his sickle into the earth, the emblem of avenging justice, and with infinite ease the earth is reaped, which means it's judged and punished accordingly. Our final verses, 17 to 20. Then another angel came out of the temple which is in heaven, having also a sharp sickle. And another angel came out from the altar which had power over fire, and cried with a loud voice to him that had the sharp sickle, and said, Thrust in thy sharp sickle, and gather the clusters of the vineyard of the earth, for her grapes are ripe. And the angel thrust in his sharp sickle on the earth, and cut down the vines of the vineyard of the earth, and cast them into the great winepress of the wrath of God. And the winepress was trodden without the city, and blood came out of the winepress unto the horse bridles by the space of 1,600 furlongs. So here we have a complete account of the final days of the papacy. Here we have the execution of the sentence pronounced by the 3 reforming angels. After all the adherents of the anti-Christian system have been given time to repent, the time of judgment is here at hand. Here we have 3 more angels executing in stages the end of the papal church and state. The nations of Christendom, having drunk the wine of the mother of harlots, have exhausted the patience of Christ. They have refused to heed the warning of the 3 angels of reform, and they have rejected the teaching of the Reformation. The fire spoken of here are the words of faithful gospel ministers. The vineyard by which they give their message is the earth, and the vines of her grapes represent the Antichrist and her apostate followers. They're about to get put in the winepress. The winepress is a symbol of God's wrath. The bloodletting that is the result of God's wrath, we're told, will be as high as the bridles of a horse and stretch for 1,600 furlongs, or 200 miles. We have no idea what that means yet. These final 4 verses provide us with a picture of bloody judgment. In these verses, John gives us a broad sketch of the end of Antichrist, with which he will be much more specific in our upcoming chapters, especially when we continue in chapter 15 and 16 when we get to the 7 vials. Let us pray. Our Lord our God, we do see from thy holy word exactly what you predicted to be true.